All right, welcome to the next edition of What's in a Game. I'm here with Grace Jean. How are you doing, Grace?
I'm good. I'm feeling extra peppy today, which is good because I have a long travel day ahead of me.
Yes, you're going on a vacation. So
Ah,
we are recording this days ahead of Nuggets Wolves game one, which is the perfect time to dive into our thoughts of the series. I actually just got done being on a quote unquote tirade on Twitter, just
oh,
being
yeah, I
very
saw.
frustrated at people talking about the Wolves, which everyone was coming in my comments saying that people aren't underestimating the Nuggets, but I think people are not really understanding what I'm saying, which I'll go into detail later. So this will go kind of like I'm going to give angry hot takes on this series, and then Grace is going to
This is
come
what the
in.
people have wanted from you,
Yeah,
Will.
Grace is going to come in with the reason and the rational, measured, analytical takes, and I'm just going to be like a fan. So we'll see how that segment goes. But before we get to that, let's check in on the playoff picture.
Yeah, since we last recorded, the Boston Celtics extinguished the Miami Heat last night, actually, in a giant blowout win. In Boston, Miami Heat were already without Jimmy Butler and Terry Rozier. They also were down Jaime Jaquez, who went down with a hip injury in the middle of the prior game. Boston obviously missing Kristaps Porzingis. I don't remember if we talked about this on our last show, but Kristaps strained his calf in the middle of game 4. And so he is questionable basically for the next at least several games, as the Celtics organization has reported it, which could be a big deal later down the line. But Boston was able to maybe buy them some extra rest time for Kristaps in particular by finishing up this series. And the Cleveland Cavaliers went back home and they took care of business against the Orlando Magic. Now, that game was really interesting because it was a bit of a nail biter. It was the first game in the series that wasn't a double digit win for either team. I actually thought that Orlando was playing Cleveland pretty well, similar to how they had at home, at least on the defensive end. But Cleveland was fighting back quite a bit more. Now, they were without Jarrett Allen in that game. And I thought that it would give Orlando an opportunity to really dominate the offensive glass, given that Mobley is a negative rebounder for his position. But the Magic weren't really attacking the glass really as much as they had when they were at home. And I'd always said in this series that the Magic had a chance because I chose them in the series. But I thought because of how limited their half court offense is, they have to dominate the offensive glass in order to um, create like reliable offense throughout the series. And in all of the games that Cleveland has won, they've been able to just keep the rebounding battle close. And they were able to do that again. And Orlando's clutch offense woes also came to the forefront in this game. They actually led, I think, by 5 with something like 6 minutes left in the game. We saw some incredible shot making by Paolo Banchero, but we also saw Paolo's shot selection. We saw some really interesting late game possessions where Franz was running the show, but we see his current limitations as a scorer. And so both of those players had opportunities throughout the series and will continue to, because Cleveland is up 3-2, but the series isn't over. Had opportunities to go through the ebbs and flows of a playoff series with respect to their individual play and bounce back, and then have the other team sort of learn more about their tendencies and punch back in that way. I think that earlier in the series, France had largely been cooking Evan Mobley one on one. But in this game, Evan Mobley actually got the game saving block because France had blown by Mobley and had a chance to tie the game at the rim, and Mobley just barely blocked it. Uh, I think Orlando's probably going to be kicking themselves for letting that game go because they were finally in a game on the road. And I think the momentum of the series is kind of firmly with the Cavs now
Hmm.
because they did win the first two games very comfortably. Orlando did punch back, but then Cleveland was able to get this gut check win at home.
I just wanted to say I'm interested to see which series ends up in Game 7 if we get any, because
That's a good
I want to
question.
see when we look back, what series is going to be probably the closest in terms of getting to the Game 7 and being hopefully a good game. Bucks Pacers I thought was going to already be over, but here it is still going. Cavs
Yeah,
Magic
the
has seemed
Pacers let that one
unpredictable.
go in
Yeah,
Milwaukee.
I knew Celtics wasn't going the distance. I don't expect Mavs Clippers to go the distance, but it could. You never
Never
know.
know. The Knicks Sixers has an argument. I'm really curious about how the Villanova Knicks bounce back in game
Hmm.
6. I think that that series of the four that are currently tied at 3-2 has the best chance of going 7 only because the team that's up has the lowest margin for error. I think the Cavs, they should have more. They have an argument, like the Cavs Magic series has an argument, but in my mind, the Cavs, the base, like, can you get a bucket in the half court? The Cavs should be able to do that on a more
Hmm.
consistent basis than Orlando. But Orlando's defense has been so good that they've, gotten the series to this point even. I'm curious to see what that game 6 looks like from both teams because now Orlando's fighting for their life and Cleveland is fighting to not push this to a game 7. In the Mavs Clippers series, I think there is a big gap between the two teams, but it's all been about approach. In both of the games that the Mavs lost, they started off the game incredibly slow on one or the other end of the floor. Like they weren't making any shots, and the defense was atrocious. But in the games that they won, they haven't looked. The Mavericks haven't looked particularly impressive offensively in this series. Even in the games they've won, it's really their defense that has carried them through. And so, Harden or PG could get them a game. You never know. But in terms of just like a steady and consistent team that has like a defined path to how they win a game on any given night, it seems like the Mavericks should finish this off in 6.
Yeah, can I just say about the
Yeah.
Clippers?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sometimes there's trends in the NBA or narratives that get made by media and fans where I sometimes give the benefit of the doubt and I'm not as quick to jump on.
Okay.
Like with Kawhi's injuries, we could say he's always hurt in the playoffs. And I'm just, at some point, I can't fully buy into it because I just think he's gonna be healthy for one playoffs one of these days. It just seems like it has to happen. Like what would have to happen for him to really be hurt every playoffs? This very unlucky knee stuff with him. But here we are again. And then even with the James Harden stuff, he has the narrative that he's a playoff jumper and he has these bad games, but I still in the back of my mind think James Harden is a really good player and he sometimes gets on these teams where he's playing the right way and he's showing that he can be like mature and with Kawhi being out, maybe there was more room for him to facilitate and, have more freedom or something. But here he is again with this like terrible shooting game, low points, and I'm just like, I guess I should have just bought into the narratives and not tried to be so I don't know what the word is forgiving, but here we are again.
I think that the Harden case is interesting in particular because I didn't think that he played badly in the last game. He was just missing shots, and it's not like the
Hmm.
shots were open. I thought that Dallas did a much better
Hmm.
job on him defensively. And now it's not like they didn't do a decent job on him defensively in prior games. There are just specific things that you have to do with Harden because he is such a good player. So it's not like in this game, like again, Dallas was playing good defense on him, but he was able to get by his guy. But once he got into the lane, he was met with all of this length between Lively and Gafford next to a Kleba front court. A lot of people pointed out how Dallas went double big. And I think that he struggles with that. However, last year, when in Harden's bad games with the Sixers against the Celtics, he was playing poorly. Horrible body language, doing all kinds of like ridiculous stuff, trying to grift and not get the calls. I didn't actually see a ton of that in this game. And maybe you could say like I think he didn't take that many shots. You could say that he kind of
It
shrunk
was
from the
it was
moment
like
once his
2 for
shot wasn't
12,
going
I
down.
think.
Yeah, 12 shots for like he's the primary shot creator on this team without Kawhi. That's very low. And he was like running the offense poorly in those other games with the Sixers. So I think that there's like different ways to evaluate how he played given what the expectation was.
All right, well, let's move on to Nuggets and Wolves. One of the most interesting series that we may see in this playoffs, especially if these injuries on these other contenders are going to keep holding up, and or OKC and the Mavs don't just stun everybody and go all the way to the finals. I got to tell you, I've been listening to some other people's previews on this series and predictions, and granted, for context, before we get into this, last season, the Wolves were a different team, and there was no Jaden McDaniels. We all realize that. And the Nuggets were a different team in
And
some
no Nas
cases.
Reed.
Yeah, they have no Nas Reed, so they're adding him in. Also, in the regular season, it's hard to find good comparisons because we had so many games where either Jamal Murray wasn't playing or Cat wasn't playing. So it's hard to
Or
really
Cat and
know.
Rudy weren't playing.
I also just am skeptical because we had seen so many people talk about the previous Suns Wolves series and talk about the X's and O's and how the Wolves were going to give up these mid range shots because that's the one shot their defense allows, and the Suns are these short mid range shot specialists. Ultimately, I just picked the Wolves over the Suns because I didn't want to overthink it. I just thought the Wolves were way better of a team. We saw the Suns be inconsistent all year. Obviously, the Nuggets and the Wolves were very consistent teams for the most part. I mean, they finished in the top 3 in the West, which is really good. So you can't really say either team had a bad regular season. They had their strengths and weaknesses throughout the season. So with that said, do you want to kind of go through what we do know about these teams?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, obviously you have to watch the series play out to know what is going to happen, but there are some clues that we can pick up along the way to figure out what the pivot points are going to be. Now, one of the things I did over the last 2 days was rewatch the Wolves Nuggets series from last season. And I know you were doing some of your own work on that as well, just to figure out some of the matchups between the players that were playing in those series that will also be playing this year. So I don't know, what are your big takeaways from last year's series?
The Wolves' offense was really not very good in that series, specifically Cat, who shot 25% from 3. And the first couple games, his shot just wasn't falling. And then he started going to the paint more and having more success and scoring more.
From my watch, Cats three pointers were almost always contested. I did watch a lot of Suns Wolves, but I don't remember how much of an emphasis the Suns had on contesting Cat's 3-point shot. So maybe you could shed some light on that.
How
But
much the Suns contested? Yeah,
yeah,
I'm not quite sure. Yeah, he did. He shot 50. He shot 53% in the
on
series.
4 attempts per game. Yeah.
So he can definitely do it. When AG was on Cat in that series, he really didn't do a whole lot. He didn't even get up a lot of attempts, and he didn't make a lot of shots either. He did have pretty good success versus the bench minutes, and so that's definitely something to look forward to because I feel like Rudy's at least gonna match when Jokic is playing. I don't know if Cat's gonna do that. I think it would be smart for the Wolves to play him in some non-Jokic minutes so that he can go against some smaller players on the Nuggets and get in the paint. But I'm wondering how aggressively Cat are going to pursue attacking the paint versus try to like settle for shots. I don't anticipate they will, and I know Chris Finch is smart, and he should probably be telling them to try to attack the paint.
I think that they will. Last year, the other big takeaway from that series for me was how much trouble the drive and kick game of the Wolves gave us. I think that the Nuggets benefited a little bit from some over aggressiveness from Ant when he would sometimes drive into traffic. or not see the late help until it was too late, and get blocked whenever there was kind of a wall forming around him around in the paint. But I think as that series went on, Ant started to anticipate that more. He knew that even we were helping off even strong side, and it's not like you're always giving up that corner three, but even with the hard closeout in rotation, you're initiating that drive and kick sequence. And so the Wolves were getting the Nuggets in rotation very easily by the end of that series because of how we had to guard Ant in particular. I think that with Cat, he's trying to get into the teeth of the defense to score most of the time on his drives, which are very uncontrolled drives. But he is not always going to pass out. So I think late help is like going to be a little bit more effective with him. I think that the problem for the Nuggets with Ant is that they can't allow him to constantly get the Nuggets in rotation. Now, that's their base coverage and pick and rolls, putting two on the ball, uh, whether it's through some blitzes or some Jokic playing at the level. But you don't always want to do that in particular against this team because of the rebounding issues, right? The Wolves are not an amazing offensive rebounding team. They're actually 21st in offensive rebounding percentage. But we did see that in particular against the Suns last series, they were completely dominating the glass on both ends of the floor. And part of the reason that they were able to do that, and probably was part of their game plan, is so they knew they had a size advantage and they could get the Suns in rotation because the Suns didn't have anybody who could stay in front of Ant either. And so they were constantly putting two, sometimes three on the ball, and leaving offensive rebounding opportunities on the table for these other huge players that the Wolves have. Now, the Nuggets are bigger than the Suns and they're a better defensive rebounding team than Phoenix is. However, but just speaking more on defense, I think the Nuggets would probably prefer to stay out of rotation as much as possible when they have lineups that aren't Jokic and AG on the floor, because every other lineup is going to be undersized relative to the Wolves lineups because of their big rotation.
Thinking about the rebounding, which obviously that was one of the differentiators in the Suns Wolves series. Looking at their stats from that series, they shot the same percentage from the floor and from three, both teams. But where the Suns got really killed was rebounding.
Points
The
off
Wolves were,
turnovers.
yeah, and the Wolves were just moving the ball more, like just a more creative offense. It's one of those things where heading into the series, you're thinking the Suns got Nurk, who's going to hopefully get more rebounds, give them extra possessions, and then the rest of the dudes are going to score a lot. The stats almost bared it out in the regular season. We're like coming into that series, I don't
There
remember the
was
rebounding
one
stats.
game where Nurk was super active on the glass. He had like 20 rebounds, and I think Rudy only had 7 in that game. But
Yeah,
the
but it's
Suns
just
got
like
effectively blown out anyway because they won everything else.
I don't know. I don't know how other people feel, but I was not confident that Nurkic was going to outplay Rudy Gobert on the glass. And one thing that I've
He was
noticed,
capable of it, but did
yeah,
not throughout most of the series.
I think the most important thing with the Rudy Jokic matchup is Jokic really making sure that he's going to out rebound Rudy. It's just like I think whoever really tries and gets those rebounds, it's going to be a huge difference maker.
One of the things that I have noted since last year's playoffs is that one of the ways that you could diminish Jokic's impact substantially on the game. A lot of people talk about, do you make him a passer, do you make him a scorer? I say you take away his rebounding. And one of the ways that you do that is, in particular, when he's crashing the offensive glass, but even defensive rebounding, which the Nuggets have not been as quite as good at this year. They're third in, they're sixth in offensive rebounding, but 15th in defensive rebound. Is you collapse on him whenever he's trying to get a rebound, either offensive or defensive. This is going to be a big series for AG for that reason, and also MPJ,
Yeah.
because the Wolves are constantly going to be gang rebounding on him to try to make sure that he can't either finish defensive possessions by grabbing the defensive rebound, or obviously can't get his putbacks. And even when if he gets that rebound, if he's got like 3 guys on him that are big because the Wolves are huge, it's going to be a lot harder for him to, tip it in and all of that stuff. So you end up in a situation where the best rebounder on your team is going to be targeted in that particular way. Now, some of the worst games for the Nuggets are games where Yoke didn't grab, say, 10 rebounds. One of them in the playoffs last year was, I believe it was game 3 against Phoenix, in Phoenix, where he had 5 rebounds. And it was in part because they were guarding him in such a way that kept him on the perimeter and put the rebounding burden on the others, and they didn't deliver there, so the team rebounding wasn't good. But also because of that, whenever he could get inside, they had everyone collapsing on him, whether it was the offensive or the defensive glass. And I think that the Wolves are smart enough to figure that out, because I saw it in uh, in some of the regular season matchups, as well as some of the games in the playoffs against the Wolves last year. In particular, as the series went on, I think that the Wolves learned more about the Nuggets, which is why the games started getting closer and closer as
Hmm.
that series went on too. I think that's probably true of every playoff series, by the
Yeah.
way, right?
Thinking about the Suns and their ability to rebound versus the Wolves and how we talked about it before the series versus when then we saw what happened. Whereas I'm just still taking Jokic's ability to rebound, even with the Wolves' size and even with them trying to make it an emphasis. Because as soon as they out rebound us and out rebound Jokic in one game, the Nuggets the next time are going to come out and they're going to dominate the glass again.
Yeah.
At least I have confidence in them to do that. But if they don't, then you tip your hat to the Wolves. They did what they needed to do. And that's kind of what a lot of this boils down to, is just kind of how are they going to limit Jamal? Is Jamal going to get space? Once they figure that out, how are the Wolves going to counter that? And it's just they have the bodies to throw at those kinds of things, and their defense is amazing. So I'm not saying that the Nuggets are going to be able to drop 130 on them or 120. Like, this is going to be a slow series, probably low scoring kind
I
of a
hope it's not a
game.
slow series. That means
Yeah,
neither team is scoring. If it's a slow series, we're going to have games that are like 67-70.
I don't mean that slow, but
No,
I
I,
mean,
I what I mean is that both of these teams, in particular, we saw it in the last regular season matchup, but it was true as the playoff series last year went on as well. For the Nuggets, it was from the beginning. Like, we have to run on this team. The Nuggets
mhm,
knew that not only did they want to kind of blitz the Wolves like they did in game 1, which was the only like true blowout in against the Wolves in the playoffs last year, but every game after that as well, the emphasis was on getting out and running. As the series went on, you could see that it was true for the Wolves as well. Transition and semi-transition kept them in all of those games. And so transition defense for both teams is going to be an emphasis. Now, I personally think that the Nuggets are able to get more in semi-transition even when your transition defense is good, because good transition defense often still gives up cross matches and things that can be exploited either early in the clock or late in the clock in the half court once you get there. And I think
mhm,
that the Nuggets are a lot more intentional about how they get those, because they are an offensive minded team. As good as the Timberwolves are, and they have an offensive formula, they are, uh, was it 17th in offense on the
mhm.
season? And they are a defensive minded team. That is what got them here. And the Nuggets are a good defense too, but they are an offensive first team. That is how they, that is their strength. That is what makes them so good throughout the playoffs, both as I've been following the team through last year and this year. I've seen all the different ways that they counter offensively what the other team is doing. Now, this year, they have a much better defense than they did last year. And I think the Wolves know that too. And so I think the emphasis for both teams is going to be to run on the other team to try to score,
Yes.
because both teams know that the other has a good half court defense. And in particular, unlike against Phoenix, the Wolves will not have the same size advantage that they did in the half court against the Nuggets.
It's kind of funny as hearing you talk about semi transition. I wanted to joke
Mhm.
that the Nuggets are probably better in semi transition than real
I
transition.
completely agree. I completely
Yeah.
agree. That's one of it's funny because I saw one of the things that some of the Wolves people think is that they actually want to make it a fast series and like get the Nuggets out and running because they can
Oh
like
man.
force them to make mistakes. And I think that that's a strategy in particular because the Wolves are a much better transition defense this year than they were last year. They were very undisciplined in that playoff series in transition.
Yeah.
But I think the Nuggets have figured out exactly what you just said, that sometimes they're just better in semi-transition. They're not forcing up shots and at the rim with like 2 or 3 Wolves back, or turning the ball over because they're trying to hit the ball ahead too much. I do think they tried to do that a little too much against the Lakers, which led to some really nasty turnovers.
Hmm.
But they were able to get through that series anyway. There are other ways to garner transition based advantages that aren't just about fast breaks and runouts.
And the Wolves did win the turnover battle in our regular season series. There are these like little points like this where you say, the Nuggets lost the turnover battle in the regular season, but they're going to take care of the ball in the playoffs. And then there's a similar thing where it's like Cat can do some stupid fouls, but I also assume he's probably going to try to be a little bit smarter about that. Like, I
Well,
don't
you'd
know.
think that he
We'll
would have done that in
see.
round one as well, but
Yeah. Well, we'll see if Ant calling him out on it and all that and talking about how important it is that he's got to rein it in. We'll see if he does it or not. There are just certain things I think where you think about some of the weaknesses of these teams, and even in those games in the regular season where you assume both teams are going to clean those things up as much as they can. So I'm uncertain about which things are really going to like show
yeah.
themselves in the series or not.
I have
Oh yeah,
something to
go
say
ahead.
about that really quick. So, when you talk about assuming that teams are going to clean some of this stuff up, I think that's right. And there are certain things like I mentioned the Nuggets are a mid defensive rebounding team on the whole. But when you look at the lineup data, every lineup with Jokic is an amazing defensive rebounding team. And it was the bench lineups in particular, those where it was Zeke Naji at the 5, as opposed to the Nuggets playoff lineups with Aaron Gordon at the 5. Now, some of those lineups do struggle as well, but some of them are pretty solid to great too. But I also tend to think that, like we talked about on our last episode, in the regular season, teams show you who they are. And so there are certain tendencies and bad habits that both teams will be able to exploit in that matchup. And the turnover battle is going to be a big one. So you could say, like, hey, when the Nuggets play the Wolves in the regular season, they lost the turnover battle. But on the whole, the Nuggets are a pretty good team at taking care of the ball, and that will be a point of emphasis against the Wolves because they lost that turnover battle in the regular season. In contrast, the Wolves are 23rd in turnover percentage. They're a really bad team at turning the ball over. When you look at all their offensive stats, they're a good shooting team. They're a good effective field goal percentage team. They score well at the rim. They get shots in the right areas of the court, the high value areas of the court. But the reason that they're 17th in offense is because they turn the ball over so much that they diminish their offensive efficiency just by virtue of losing possessions that way. I think that the turnover battle is going to end up being really important. And one of the things that looking into that made me think about was last year, the Nuggets were a mid defense, but when you look at even during their stretches of good defense, they weren't a team that turned other teams over a lot. They weren't getting a lot of steals and live ball turnovers in that way. However, you saw them play a team like the Phoenix Suns in round 2, a team that really struggled with turnovers, in particular after Chris Paul went out, it was clear from the way that the Nuggets were defending and the way that they were getting into the ball and applying ball pressure and off ball pressure to try to force those turnovers, that that was a point of emphasis in how they were going to defend that particular team to exploit that particular weakness. And it seems like the Wolves knew that too with this same Phoenix Suns team, slightly, or not slightly, but very differently constructed with the same core when they played them in round 1 just, this past week. because you end up in a situation where the Suns can shoot well from the field, but if they're losing the possession battle because of rebounding and turnovers, then you can beat them, which is why even though the Phoenix Suns shot over 50% in almost every game against the Nuggets last year, they got blown out in 3 out of the 4 wins and, barely eked out the couple that they won in games 3 and 4. So there's some things that you can learn from how a team operates in the regular season, but you also have to take into account what things teams are going to adjust to specifically hone in on the very tendencies and bad habits of their opponent.
Kind of thinking about these teams more broadly and just in context of this series where the Nuggets' health is now a question a little bit.
Yes.
The Wolves look healthier. They had an easier series, so they're more fresh. But on the flip side, this is the first second round series for this Wolves group. And we saw the Nuggets go on a lot of runs where they get to the Western Conference Finals, like in the bubble against the Lakers, and then they were a really physical team. And then they had to kind of reevaluate what it really took to go that far. I just wonder, since the Wolves haven't gone on these long playoff runs, what their motor is like compared to the Nuggets. Because the Nuggets are a really good team where they're running a lot. We saw Jokic running AD in the Western Conference Finals last year. We know Jokic is really well conditioned. I really want to see him running from the baseline and setting screens, or if he's driving inside and he's passing out, I want him to run out and re-screen. I want him to run Rudy and Cat all over the place, and that is going to play a huge part in the series too. Is just the Nuggets trying to run everywhere, motion everywhere, screen everywhere, and tire them out.
I think that's a really good point because one of the thing that the Wolves have been an amazing defense all season long. That's why they're number one defense. And that the way that they play defense is very physical, is very energy consuming, just because they're always flying around, always pressuring the ball. They're very aggressive basically at every point on the floor. But there is another gear that they hit in the playoffs, and you saw that. They had to change their scheme against the Suns, and it required even more energy expenditure. And they were executing a different scheme, but also at a higher level than they had in the regular season. And it was very impressive. But like you're saying, going into round two, I'm not sure that they know the amount of stamina that it takes to keep up playoff level defense for a team that is, I think, much better than the Phoenix Suns in the Denver Nuggets. But also, if they're going to know how to sort of pace themselves. Now, the thing that the Wolves have going for them is that their most active defenders are very young in Ant and Jaden and NAW. But the other thing that they have going for them is that they have so many. They have a very versatile roster, especially defensively, that they can constantly be throwing out there to give guys relief. There was this game against between Golden State and OKC earlier in the season where you had Lou Dort chasing Steph around all night, and OKC ended up winning that game in overtime after I think Dagnall took out Lou Dort and put in Case and Wallace to chase around Steph in OT, and then Shea was switching on to him at different points and whatnot. And after the game, Dagnall was talking about how he said, "Yeah, like I knew that those guys were going to be completely gassed, so I told them just literally give me all the juice that you have for the time that you're on the floor, and when you're done, I will let me know. I will take you out." And I will sub in someone else who can, in like the good way, not the
Yeah.
oh, this is threatening your job kind of way. It's like that I know how much energy it takes to chase that guy around all night. So give me maximum effort when you're out there and then sub those in. And the Wolves have the ability to do that just because of their versatile defensive roster as well. So they might not have to do what we're talking about now, which is sort of pacing themselves, especially defensively, like the Nuggets do at times, you know, to
Hmm.
our chagrin often. But part of it is understanding what it takes to go the distance, not just in a series, but further down in the playoffs as well. So it is an interesting question, but I think that the Wolves have some advantages there that are going for them just because of, again, the
Hmm.
youth and the
Hmm.
depth of on their roster.
Yeah, I am interested to see how big of an advantage their depth is or not. Because I don't think anyone would question the Wolves are more deep than the Nuggets, but the Nuggets, their identity kind of is just a playoff team where they want to play a short rotation. Not they're not doing it in the regular season, obviously, but when we can do it in the playoffs, we play really well because we have good players. And the minutes where Jokic isn't playing or we don't have multiple starters out on the floor is way different than the regular season.
I do think that the Wolves bench will probably play more minutes than the guys off of the
Mhm.
Nuggets bench.
Right.
But I think the value of the bench for the Timberwolves is in being able to give relief to their starters without the fear
Mhm.
of a collapse so that the starters are more rested for when they come back in. I don't
Yeah.
know that the sort of player quality is gonna matter all that much. When you've got 5 guys on the floor, everybody's doing something. So it's not
Mhm.
like, unless you have someone who's literally just out there laying an egg, like, somebody's gonna grab those rebounds. So it's not like you're that either team's gonna deal with, guys that aren't doing anything. That's the point of the playoff rotation shortening, is that you're trusting the guys that are out there to
Mhm.
constantly be playing, be producing, even if it's not through scoring. Now, one of the things I think that the Nuggets bench is gonna have going for them versus Minnesota compared to, say, how Minnesota played against Phoenix, is our bench is a much better defensive unit than anything Phoenix could put out there. And those same bench players that were kind of going off against the Suns probably won't have quite as easy a time on offense. Now, our bench struggles offensively when we have, say, only one or two starters out there, even when it is AG or Jamal, but they end up being a really good defensive unit. And I'm sure Malone will play around with
Mhm.
some of those lineups as well to kind of boost the scoring. But I'm not as worried about the bench minutes matchup, just because I do think our bench, for the most part, our playoff bench, makes up for what it lacks offensively. This is in the non-Jokic minutes. Makes
Mhm.
up for what they lack offensively on defense. The
Yeah.
question I have really are the Jokic minutes without Jamal, just because depending on how many bench guys are out there with him, we have a very much more defensively inclined bench rotation when it comes to Christian Brown, Peyton Watson, and um, Reggie Jackson and Justin Holiday is sort of the 8.5 man rotation, because I'm not sure Justin will play all that much in this series. Just kind of depends on the flow of the games. But it hurts when there's so much pressure on Jokic to produce all of the offense, especially against a team that's going to be completely scheming to make the other guys beat them if they're smart. Like, I think that's what you should do. If Jokic was out there with four bench guys, you should try to get the ball out of his hands and make the other guys beat you, in particular because they're young. Not just that they're defensively inclined, but because they're young, they tend to be just a little bit more tentative with the ball. And it puts more pressure on the flow of the offense. Now, we're a very rhythm-based offense at our best, and when you have guys that are tentative with the ball, and it's not just take a shot, it's drive, kick, make another play, um,
Mhm.
or get the ball to the right guy at that right moment. Because in particular against this Wolves team, I've talked about this, how the only way that you score on this team is if you are constantly decisive with what you're doing with the ball, whether it's passing, driving, shooting, because they are so big and they are so active that any small window that you have to attack or make a play is going to be closed very quickly if you're tentative.
One thing we had talked about with Jaden McDaniels even is because I was talking about how impressed I was with him on offense, like even just having a little drive and jumper game going. Like he can score those and he can shoot threes. But getting him dribbling, he may turn it over. And I think even with Ant, like we're gonna try and force him to make tough passes. This in the same way that maybe the Suns did, but just less effectively for on their end. Also, I think about this big debate between offense and defense in the NBA now, and there's the phrase that defense wins championships. If the Wolves go all the way and they win a championship because their defense was just so overwhelming, then I guess we can all talk about how important it really is. But I've been more on the side of favoring the offense these days, especially in this NBA, where I still think defense is important, but it's not the phrase defense wins championships. It's more like all things being equal, defense can separate you when it comes down to it. Like a defense can get you an extra possession in a tight game between two top teams who are in the finals. And sometimes it's like with the Nuggets and Lakers in those games that are really close. It came down to like who's going to get a stop, and the Lakers just couldn't do it, and the Nuggets were just always scoring.
Now,
Um,
part of the reason for that wasn't that the Lakers' defense was bad, it's because the Nuggets' offense overwhelmed them.
exactly. And it's just like the Lakers were a very, very good defensive team last year in the Western Conference Finals, but the Nuggets swept them because they have so much firepower. Jamal was playing really well. I think there's a little bit of underestimating on both sides of these teams where a lot of people are assuming Jaden McDaniels is just going to shut Jamal down and therefore Jokic is going to have to score more, which is true, but I still think it's actually important to get Jamal going because he had a really good series versus the Wolves last year. He had one 40-point game. He had a game where he, I think, scored like 18 or something like that. Um, he kind of was up and down, but he still had these amazing performances. So if we can get performances out of him this time by not just accepting that McDaniels is on him, we're not going to him, and we're forcing it too much with Jokic or somebody else, it may be getting us out of what we like to do, which I think the Wolves are pretty good at. I'm interested to see just how comfortable the Nuggets look versus the amount to which the Wolves can dictate the terms of how this is going to go.
That the Wolves' defense will probably dictate more than we would like, but that the Nuggets will be able to figure that out. With other teams, I would be more skeptical of the Nuggets' ability to win a series if they're letting the other team dictate their shot diet. But with the Wolves, because they are such a good defense, it's easy to see why you just have to know where your shots are going to come from. Because, like I said, that decisiveness is so important.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're wasting time sort of thinking about how do I get to the thing that I want, even though they're doing everything in their power to completely shut that down, you end up just wasting possessions. I think that the possession battle in general, for rebounding, turnovers, whatever, is going to be the most important part of this series just because of what I said earlier, where, yeah, the Wolves are not highly ranked in offense, but you look at all their offensive metrics when they are able to get to a shot and aren't just turning the ball over. And they're a pretty good offensive team. Um, it's one of the reasons I think Mike Conley is going to be an interesting key in this series. I think the Wolves let Ant run the show a lot, but Mike Conley is the best decision maker on that team. And one of the things going through the entire 5 game series over the last 2 days from last year was that Mike Conley could read certain moments in the game where either the game's getting away from them and he wants to make a play to try to get it close. And the Wolves were fine with that. Of course, that was last year before it was made and 100% clear that Ant is the guy on this team. But you even saw it in certain portions of the series against the Suns, where the thing that the team goes to settle things was Mike Conley and Rudy Gobert pick and roll. Now, I did see a lot more of Ant either running empty side ISOs or pick and roll in those moments too against the Suns. So the balance that the Wolves take between those two uh, as lead ball handlers and lead initiators, guys that are there to settle the offense down in particular, like, hey, like they're going on a run, whatever. And there's other things you can do. Like Ant also likes to get out really quick in transition, just get a quick bucket, throws everything off to sort of stymie any momentum. But Mike Conley is also going to be important for end of game decision making as well, because he's either going to be the one making those decisions or he's going to be the coach on the floor for Ant in all likelihood. What do you think is going to be like, how do you see the clutch sort of playing
Hmm.
out between these two
Right.
teams based on what we've
Yeah.
seen in the regular season and in round
Right.
one?
So clutch situations will go to it's going to be Jamal and Jokic pick and roll most of the time for the Nuggets offensively. Probably gonna be Jamal having more of an open shot because the Wolves are going to try to stick to Jokic and they'll probably accept Jaden chasing Jamal and getting a good contest on him still and making that shot even harder, especially if Jamal is hobbled a bit. Um, and then for the Wolves, I see, at least from what I'm observing, Ant kind of taking over. And like, I could see him doing like some pull up threes, like just in hitting one in someone's face. Um, he may miss them, he may not, but if they do go to Conley and let him operate more in those clutch situations just to take care of the ball and get a good shot, and Ant can kind of be off ball, that's cool too. I think that's a viable thing, but it's kind of hard to imagine not letting Ant have the ball in the clutch when he's so explosive and may be able to just drive right to the rim and just dunk it because the Nuggets are, preoccupied by some other actions that are going on. I don't know.
I think that I've seen the Wolves try a lot of different things in the clutch, so I'm still not sure if they know what their go-to is going to be, or even if they have just one, or if it's going to be sort of situational. I mean, one of the huge differences between these two teams is their clutch time execution on both ends of the floor. So the Nuggets are third in clutch offense and second in clutch defense, and then first in net rating. We are the clutch merchants over here in Denver Nugget Town. But the Wolves are actually not only they're 22nd in offense, but they're 24th in clutch defense in the regular season. Now, we had one clutch game against the Suns in round one, but it was kind of a weird one. So I can't really take too much away from how the Wolves performed in, one clutch time scenario. That's just too small a sample size. I do tend to think that if I'm a Wolves fan, I'm a little bit worried by the clutch defense numbers because you are such a good defense and it is your calling card. It's the thing that keeps you in games when they might otherwise be getting away from you. But if your execution is just lapsing in these high leverage moments in the regular season, I am not while we talked about teams will clean things up in the playoffs, but
Yeah.
it's not the most comforting statistic to see that a defensive team is dropping so much in execution in the regular season. And I looked at the minutes too because it's like, well, maybe the Wolves just have a smaller clutch sample size because maybe they're just blowing teams out more because they were a very good regular season team, great point differential. But when you look at the total minutes, they've actually played more clutch minutes than the Nuggets in the regular season by about 10. They had 146. The Nuggets had 135. So, yeah, I think that the Wolves' clutch defense is going to be something to look at because I don't know if what they do is change their coverages at the ends of games and it results in other teams being able to score, or if other teams are finding those weaknesses to exploit. Now, for me, the thing that I would go to if I was the Nuggets is constantly trying to get Conley switched onto Jamal before they flow into that pick and roll, just because Jaden or Nikhil Alexander
Hmm.
Walker are really hard to screen. But if you
Hmm.
can run some off ball actions with KCP first before you flow into either a handoff or you just get Jamal on the ball to start, I would still try to get that switch because one of the things I noticed in the Wolves Nuggets series last year is in the clutch, it wasn't a ton of Jamal taking shots, in particular in the games where Nikhil Alexander Walker was guarding him. And I think he's the best defender on the Wolves on Jamal. But when Nikhil Alexander Walker's on him, like there's so much ball pressure, both on and off the ball, denying him the handoff, all of this stuff. Jamal's usually able to get the ball anyway. But the way that the Nuggets run their clutch offense when he's the primary, and we saw it in the third regular season game when Jaden was the primary too, that the clutch offense didn't, it wasn't that they didn't run the pick and roll, it's that they used it to get Jokic the ball in a spot, and Jokic was either going to score or he was running a handoff with lots of space for, say, Michael Porter Jr. And
Hmm.
that was also the case in the series last year. So that's one of the things I'm going to be looking at for sure is whether the Nuggets bread and butter action is going to be used as the ends or if it's just going to be a means to flow into another perhaps more um, advantageous action. And last year, the Wolves had Ant on MPJ, and Ant's really strong. He's a great point of attack defender. But the reason I wouldn't put him on Jamal, and the reason that MPJ I think was able to go off quite a bit more in the Wolves series last year, and he looked pretty comfortable in every game, either getting to open shots or driving in, is that Ant is pretty easy to screen off ball, and he sometimes gets lost off ball. I think he's a little bit better about that this year, but he's like just bigger and just that makes him easier to screen both on and off the ball. So I think that that's going to be a really interesting story
Hmm.
going into any close games in this
Yeah.
series.
One of the things I am certain of is Jokic is going to score. Ant is going to score. I think Rudy being a roamer is a little bit overrated. I don't think that's going to do that much. I will be
Yeah.
interested to see how much he leaves like Aaron Gordon and if we're ever going to be able to hit him because maybe Cat and Gobert are just too big and we can't get that pass. Like I'm kind of interested to see how that plays out.
So
If ever.
that's one of the things. So the Nuggets have offensive counters for that don't just rely on AG making open corner threes, right?
Oh yeah.
A lot
No.
of it's going to be AG screening off the ball, AG being on the ball, either initiating or being sort of a connective passer within actions. But the thing that having to do that use that counter against that defensive alignments that the Wolves like to have against Jokic is it actually helps to keep AG on the perimeter more, which keeps him off the offensive glass for the most part. AG can also obviously like sneak in and crash there, but it's different when he's sort of constantly in the dunker spot and then he can try to sneak in and gobble up rebounds there. But that's one of my key matchups in this series too is AG versus Rudy on the
Hmm.
glass.
Yeah.
Because even though AG is going to be guarding Cat most of the time, and sometimes it'll be on the perimeter, sometimes it'll be inside on the post, etc. Whenever I watched the series last year where they had the same defensive alignment on Jokic, where they had Cat on him and Rudy roaming, it was AG that was constantly battling Rudy for rebounds. And he often lost that battle, but when he did, it felt big
Oh yeah.
because obviously Rudy has that size advantage on him. And it felt like the other Wolves were working to body up Jokic to try to keep him off the glass. Um, so the way that those two, as our main front court guys, sort of uh, figure out how to complement each other on the glass, because we've seen sequences where they're sort of we neither of us can get the rebound right now, but one of us is in position to tip it to the other is going to be another sort of micro battle within this
Hmm.
matchup.
We haven't talked about everybody in this series. Um, I think it's just I'm focusing a little less on Ant just because I know he's so good and he's gonna score a lot. And KCP is gonna have to just make it as tough as possible. I'm not saying KCP is some Ant solver, but he's not a nothing either. Um, I think Cat is gonna score. He's gonna have bigger games in some like he might have an 18-point game. He might have like a 28-point game, might have a 30-point game one. I don't know. Jokic is going to score a lot. I think Jamal's going to score a lot more than people are thinking. I think he's going to be able to get some separation on Jaden and will surprise some people. But then there's MPJ. What is his percentage going to
MPJ
be?
on the margins. I think MPJ is going to play a really important part in this series because he is that guy that we can go to where, unlike Kevin Durant on the Suns, who they would play through him a lot, MPJ is our bailout option on a lot of possessions. Like I
Mm-hmm.
said, with some of these clutch possessions, both in the regular season matchup and in last year's playoffs, the reason they were going to that was because of how well NEW was able to stick to Jamal. But MPJ delivered often in those moments. And the kinds of shots that he's able to create, take, and make off the ball are going to be very valuable against a defense that isn't going to let you get a lot of
In the
great
paint.
shots.
Yeah, and I think there are some people who are talking about corner threes and whether or not the Nuggets are going to give up a ton. How are they going to guard that? I know they're not going to just give them away. It's like, is this going to come down to whoever makes the most corner threes? It's going to come down to Conley was hitting his three and MBJ wasn't. Is like, I'm a little bit worried of that, where it's just like, hey, the other role players on the Wolves actually shot really well from three, and the Nuggets didn't because we kind of been slumping a little bit as a team on the 3 point. We don't take that much, and last series we didn't shoot that well from three. So,
Yeah, I mean, shooting well from three obviously helps, but one of the things that I will be watching in this series for sure, because the Nuggets did give up a lot of corner threes against the Wolves last year, in part because of what I mentioned with the drive and kick game and keeping us in rotation. That was an issue. But the Nuggets are not a team that allows a lot of threes. And it's not just because they're a low pace team, so the opposing team will be just taking fewer threes. We are a team that doesn't allow threes from anywhere on the floor to be a large part of any opponent's shot diet. And I think that's one of the ways that the Nuggets have been able to, at least through the first round, toe the line with not letting shot variance dictate
mm,
the outcome of games, or at least against them,
yeah.
right? It's one of the reasons I don't actually love uh, Nuggets just kind of accepting the shot that the other team is giving up when it's like an above the break three from a bad 3 point shooter. I don't care if we're taking 43s a game. We're not the Boston Celtics, right? Um, and there are other ways to counter that kind of defense that don't require you to just take that shot because that's what's given to you against an opponent that is such a good drive and kick team that is going to keep you in your rotation, a team that has this player in Ant who, for the most part, everyone on our roster has a hard time keeping him from getting to the rim. You end up just collapsing the defense. And so,
Hmm.
what are they going to do to ensure that we're able to protect those high value shots, in particular the rim and the corner three?
Yeah, that is a very interesting question because we could get burned. I mean, Ant can make the passes and the Wolves can hit the shots. Don't go into the series thinking, wow, the Wolves' offense was 17th, so they're just going to not hit those shots and we're going to win because they can hit them if they're not contested and the Nuggets are not locked in. Obviously, we've talked about how Jokic is going to have to play some bully ball. I think people have argued that one of the weaknesses of him this season, or just something that's a little bit down, has been his jump shot. In the game that I watched, the last matchup between the Wolves and the Nuggets, I feel
In the
like,
regular season?
yeah, in the regular season, I feel like Jokic was settling a little bit and was just like shooting, and he was a little less willing to get inside, which of course you're going to be because it's very difficult and takes a ton of effort against the Wolves. In the regular season, I don't think he's going to want to expend that energy. I saw him settling, taking threes, taking jumpers, and Cat wasn't even playing in that game. Do you anticipate Jokic having enough energy to really like push his way inside? And do you think the Wolves are going to double him more and try and take away him trying to score in the post, or are they going to just let him try to go one
No.
on one with Cat with Rudy on help side and just see how much he can score?
No, I actually love that question because when I went back to watch last year's playoff series, obviously we knew that this is the defense they like to play on Jokic because they tried it, and they tried a lot of different configurations. Rudy one-on-one on Jokic, Cat one-on-one on Jokic, Cat on Jokic, Rudy and help. Rudy on Jokic, Cat and help. That was a disaster, by the way. I don't think they're going to try that again. They tried early doubles in the post. They tried late doubles in the post. And the things with the doubles in particular, each has their pros and cons. So I'll talk about this, and then I'll talk about Jokic's jump shot and settling. We saw this with the Lakers. They were throwing a lot of early doubles in the post, and then having these windshield wiper rotations to try to recover to the guys on the perimeter. And the pros for the defense there are, you can trick the Nuggets into those early kick out threes, like I just talked about. That isn't really the flow of their offense, and they don't have a lot of great 3-point shooters, particularly off the bench. So depending on who that person is that is that one pass away, or who the ball ends up with when the defense is rotating and we're moving the ball around, you can really mess up the flow of the offense if whoever gets the ball isn't a good 3-point shooter, or doesn't attack a closeout well, say in those minutes where it's Jokic, but then you have, say, Christian Brown and Peyton Watson on the floor. The cons for the defense when you're doing these early doubles is Jokic is in the post, but as these games went on and he was sort of figuring this defense out, he's like, well, we still have to do the thing where I have to kick out and then the ball has to move back around the perimeter. What that does, or what he ended up doing, was posting up from further out.
Yeah.
And it left a much more wide open lane for whoever is attacking that final closeout. And it also, when you're doubling early and rotating back out immediately after Jokic kicks the ball out, if he's not posting up further out, he's closer to the basket, he's repositioning himself in the post, resealing the guy that he's on. And then we see this with KCP all the time. He gets the kick out from Jokic reposts, and KCP just feeds him the ball back, and now Jokic is in even deeper position, and he can get that little baby hook or even a layup if he's close enough to the basket. And it also, because of how much rotation it puts the defense in, it leaves them vulnerable to offensive rebounding opportunities for even the guys on the floor who aren't good shooters. That's a way that they can contribute to the offense. Now, when it comes to the late doubles, Jokic is posting up. He is like, okay, nobody's moving, or the defense has decided to stay home on like shooters and cutters to like say, okay, you're going to score here, except they decide to double late. So he's dribbling, he's getting into his position, and the pros for the defense are obviously that he has to work harder to try to either score on that, to try to score on that possession, but then they sort of double late, or they show late to like give a token contest. It also leaves the lane less open for cutters, in particular that alignment where it's Cat on Jokic and then Rudy on the back line. The cons there are obviously that Jokic could just score anyway. And if everyone else on the other defenders on the perimeter aren't fully locked in, that allows Jokic to control more where the pass is going to go, because he's getting deeper in. He can anticipate where the double's coming, even if it is late. He can use eye trickery to make you think the pass is going one way, so you recover out to the wrong direction, and then someone gets a wide open three, or you think it's going to a 3-point shooter, and then a cutter comes down the lane. So while it does require sharp execution for the Nuggets, like I said, they're an offensive team. They can counter these. Now, when it comes to Jokic's jump shot, it's one of the reasons that I don't actually think it's that smart to start doubling them, because the Nuggets figure these things out eventually, and then they catch a rhythm within whatever offensive flow is required to counter your defense, in particular, any kind of doubling scheme. But if you can keep Jokic in the mid-range, and in particular away from his floater range, which is still elite. It is like the most elite floater we've ever seen. His jump shot isn't as automatic this season, and he has been settling for it more, in particular from 3. And my problem with it isn't that he's taking those shots always, although they aren't always the best shot. It's when he takes them and he's settling and he hesitated on it and you can tell it's
Hmm.
out of rhythm because
Yeah.
you just know it's not going in then because he's not a shooter like that where you could
Hmm.
be at like MPJ like out of rhythm whatever but I don't even think about it. But because he's not a shooter and he's hesitating and it's out of rhythm, you just know when these things aren't going in.
Yeah.
It's good that you brought that up because the pick and pop was a really big part of how the Nuggets attacked. Yoke attacked a lot of closeouts when it was Rudy in particular having to close out on him after Jamal drives in, collapses the defense, and kicks it back out to Yoke from the 3-point line. But even when Rudy was closing out short, Jokic was able to attack that closeout and get into the teeth of the defense. So it'll be interesting to see how short Rudy starts closing out on Jokic, given what we know about how diminished his jump shot has been this year compared to last year. And whether the Wolves kind of start off with like, well, you got to prove it before we, start respecting that shot. Um, but then when it's Cat, it's like, okay, this guy is not closing out in any sort of fundamentally sound way. Like Jokic is going to either draw a foul or he's going to get all the way to the cup. And that's going to be interesting to watch in those non-Rudy minutes when it's Cat at the 5, even when like Nas is out there next to him. Um, there are a lot of different like double big rotations that the Wolves
Hmm.
can go to. So all these different alignments are really interesting to think about.
Do you want to give the people who have listened this long a little prediction for what actually happens in this series and how many games and who's going to win? Because we already made our big predictions.
I'm going to take the Nuggets. I think that even a hobbled Jamal can contribute enough to the offense without his scoring because I do think that he's going to struggle a little bit more than normal to get separation from Jaden because a lot of it, in my opinion, relies on his shiftiness. And with a calf strain, even if he's like, I don't know, semi healed by the time this series starts, it's going to be tough. I'm going to go with the Nuggets and I'm going to go with Nuggets in I'm going to go Nuggets in 6, which requires them to close out a series in Minnesota.
Hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's going to be really tough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is
So I'll
going to be
say 6 or
tough.
7, but I think they can get it done in 6.
I'm going to go with Jokic being able to solve the Wolves defense because no one has ever been able to stop Jokic. I believe in their experience and they've gone all the way and they've won the finals and the Wolves have not. I think they still have some things to learn and they could be a really good team and maybe they'll win it this year, maybe they'll win it next year. But I'm picking the Nuggets to win in 5. I think we're going to win the first 2 home games and then we're going to go up 3-0 in the first away game, lose the next away game, and then close out at home. That's what I'm picking. And I know I'm probably going to be wrong. I realize it's a very bold prediction. I guess that's
I
all I
think the
have for
Nuggets are going
that.
to lose one of the first 2 home games, to be honest.
It could require that they lose one of those games because then it's like, oh, we saw what the Wolves did and then they got to respond to it.
Yeah, no, I just it's going to be very interesting to see how both teams try to guard each other because I do think that even though Minnie's not a great offense, I think they have some weapons that present very unique challenges for the Nuggets specifically.
I thought I was going to be much more angry talking about the Wolves and all that and be like,
You were much more angry on Twitter at this
I don't
point.
believe in Jaden McDaniels. He's overrated. Like
Oh
Jamal's
my
gonna destroy
gosh.
him. But as we've talked, I feel like I've been.
Jamal's on one leg right now, dude.
I know. I feel like I'm forgetting that too. So this could be an ugly series for us Nuggets fans. Respect to the Wolves. Okay. Do you want to do the playoff draft and talk about how
Let's
this is
do
gonna
it.
work? We're gonna end with a quick playoff draft before we get out of here.
All right. So, our round 1 playoff draft, it's a positional draft. We're going to go snake draft style where we're picking a point guard, a shooting guard, a small forward, a power forward, and a center. I'm going to let Will go first, and we're going to base this off of round 1 performances.
Okay, so With my first pick, I'm taking Anthony Edwards, of course.
Of course you are. It's a good pick. He's been top 3 in round 1. He was super efficient, and he just ate their hearts in round 1, which was satisfying as a Suns hater, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm going to go with LeBron James at my power forward. And
Oh,
then
I forgot about LeBron. Dang it.
I'll go with Anthony Davis at center.
That's what I was going to pick.
The two-way impact.
Oh my
So
God. Shoot. I feel like I need a good big. Damn. Okay, fine. I'll pick Embiid.
you could also go with Hardenstein.
I'm picking Embiid.
Joel Embiid, the number 2 pick in the draft, or I guess the number 4. Okay. You get to pick again.
Jalen Brunson.
Yeah, he's been balling out. He had a rough 2 games, but really ever since then, it's like, he had some rough possessions in OT, but they had nothing for him in regulation in game 5. Okay. I'm gonna go with SGA for my point guard. Let's see, shooting guard or small forward next. Oh, of course. I'm going to go with Josh Hart at my small forward because this team is going to be a beast on the glass.
Jaden McDaniels.
At your small forward?
I just need Jaden to make life on SGA really hard over there. And then I'm picking again. I feel like I'm forgetting somebody who should be really obvious in this role.
A power forward. I guess Tatum. He's had a pretty underwhelming playoff so far, but I guess he hasn't needed to do anything.
Yeah, I don't want him having the ball. Yeah. Is J-Dub a power forward? No.
He plays power forward on that team, yeah.
Okay, then I'm picking him.
J-Dub. All right, so I've got my MVP caliber dude in SGA. I've got some backline defense. I've got my hustle guy. I have my best player I have 2 best players in closing time. Oh my gosh. LeBron and SGA? Like, I'm sorry, you're not stopping that.
Didn't we just do an episode about how Anthony Edwards dethroned LeBron?
No, he dethroned
kidding.
KD. Jamal dethroned LeBron.
Well, I'm just saying.
I know.
Both of the
But
old
like,
guys.
still, like, did you see him in the last 2 games of that series? He was
Yeah,
like,
he was great.
We couldn't stop him. We were just like, well, I hope there's more time left on the clock so we can get the final shot.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, my shooting guard, I think, has to be. Ooh, it's tough because I want some more perimeter defense, but also I don't think you can stop him. I'm going to go with Tyrese Maxey.
Oh,
you can't stop him because of all the other threats on the floor.
I could have picked him. I'm surprised neither of us picked Luka.
Well, he wasn't good until the last game. So this is based on round 1 performance.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I think J-Dub is actually like a decent defensive matchup for LeBron.
Mm-hmm.
I think Dort's better. But I still think if we're running Jaden through screens and he's going like LeBron AD pick and roll, Josh Hart's spacing might be an issue, but LeBron would figure that out. I like my team. Your team's good too. Like both of our teams are pretty. I think your team is like dogs except for Embiid.
Yeah, but I'm gonna get so many free throws. Finally, I'm on the free throw.
Oh
train.
Yeah, your Embiid's gonna demolish Anthony Davis, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
So,
but it's a one-legged Embiid. This is the round 1 Embiid, and I still picked him. So here we are. But he scored 50.
I mean, round 1 Embiid is usually better than round 2 Embiid anyway. So,
any other last thoughts before we close this episode?
No, round 1 is coming to a close. It'll just be interesting to see how those 4 series wrap up. So
yes, and then
I'm excited to get to round 2.
Yeah, we'll officially be on to round 2, and then we'll talk Nuggets, Wolves, and all the other great series that will be going around the league. If you've been listening to this, thank you so much. Please remember to like and subscribe to our new YouTube channel. Hit the notification button wherever you're listening. Leave us a review or a rating on Spotify and Amazon Music. And remember, winning is fun and losing sucks.